Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Addressing the Issue. I'm your host, Andy Streisfeld. This is being filmed after Canada Day, so a happy belated Canada Day, which is befitting because we are dealing with the issue of Canadian identity. Some of us in the society feels that we have lost our identity with all the challenges in the world and everything that is around us. Are we still Canadian? Are we following the original Canadian principles that our parents and their parents followed before? Canada is 156 years young, and in the past few years, we've been challenged, not only through the tumultuous changes brought on by the COVID situation and how we interact with each other, but it was also a tumultuous change due to quarantine, the protests, the rise of movements to protest that, and put a serious concern that is Canada of old in trouble. So over the next few episodes, we're going to be addressing the issue of Canadian identity from multiple perspectives. Tonight, we focus on the Canadian identity as peacekeepers and peacemakers in this country and internationally. And with us tonight is Dr. Alistair D. Edgar. He's an associate professor with Wilfrid Laurier in the Department of Political Science. And his expertise is in Canadian foreign policy, the United Nations, peacekeeping and peace building, and in international security. And he's remotely with us tonight. Alistair, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. Pleased to be on the show with you.
So, first question right out of the gate. How did we define this almost mythical irreverence of Canadian peacekeeping that we believe in? Where did we get this ability to be the respected among the international community? And how did we continue to live up to that standard?
Without being too iconoclastic or historical revisionist, I mean, some of it is exaggerated as we congratulate ourselves on it. Obviously, you know, the classic story begins in 1956 with the French and the British invasion of the Suez Canal after Nasser nationalized the canal. And in the face of a potential Russia-US face-off, we have Pearson proposing the creation of a neutral peacekeeping force that could come in place of American-supported Israel or Britain and France or then Soviet-supported Egypt. So, you know, we take that as Canada being the phrases you hear, you know, middle power, helpful fixer, bridge builder, all of those other things. While we would become a NATO member, we were a NATO member, but nonetheless trying to find ways to avoid military confrontation. It's worth remembering or pointing out a little bit even to then that there may have been some of that, but this was also a way of stopping a fracture in NATO, in the Western military alliance. This was alliance behavior in the West. Because you did not want to see the United States, Britain, and France being divided. So there is some helpful fixture, but there's also some what we call realpolitik involved in that proposal. Pearson managed to find a good mechanism, and Canada since then, up until the mid-1990s, was a strong and consistent participant in UN peacekeeping, although we stopped being that in the mid-1990s.
So the interesting concept is, in regards to Canadian peacekeeping, is if the United States positions themselves as the policeman of the world, and we are the peacekeeper of the world type of situation, like how do we coexist? It seems that on the North American continent, the concept is one person wants to enforce the law and the other one is there to enforce the peace.
Yeah, I guess it's probably not a surprise that a country, the United States, with global interests and global presence, will have different sets of policy priorities to a country that in many ways is protected in security, protected in a North American bubble in a way that even Europeans were not protected, right? So in some senses, what Canada enjoyed was a luxury position where we didn't have a colonial past. We did have a colonial past in our own country, but we did not have a colonial past for the global South, for African countries and others. We did not have that that image to try to deal with, and therefore we could portray ourselves to the non-aligned movements, to the global South countries, developing world. We give it different labels over time as being that way of translating ideas and values to the global hegemon, the United States, while doing so in a way that the United States was willing to listen. Not always willing to on a personal basis. I mean, presidents and prime ministers have had big differences with each other, but from country to country, at least, being seen as that kind of a voice.
Alistair, I want to take a break here right now. We're going to come back and talk about the colonial roots because there's a question rooted in that. We'll be back with addressing the issue in just a few moments.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Connection. We all need it. We live for it. It makes us feel like we're a part of something bigger. It makes us laugh, cry, and scream out for the world to hear. Connecting Canadians has been our focus for over 60 years, and it's just the beginning.
Today, I helped a parent feed their family by connecting them to a food program.
Today, I helped someone connect with mental health supports.
Today, I helped a couple struggling to pay their bills access financial aid.
Every day, 211 navigators connect Canadians to critical government and community programs and services.
211. Help starts here.
Life can be stressful. I know that. We're here to help you. Simple, easy recipes, amazing guests. At Home with Chef D, Wednesdays, 6 p.m. on Rogers TV.
6,423 missing threads.
One for every hate-fueled protest and social post.
From just the first 3 months of 2023.
All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issue. I'm Andy Streisel. We're here with Dr. Alistair Edgar. So, Alistair, the question now comes back to foreign intervention. It's a new concept for me because growing up, I saw the Cold War type of foreign intervention where you had, in this community and other communities, you had Polish activists, Ukrainian activists trying to, do their part to derail the Soviet Union and those communist parties, and they claim that there were operatives of those governments in this country. And we know this going back to history that from World War II forward, every other nationality has had somebody here from there to intervene and try to do stuff. So with the current intervention now, it's interesting because, well, we focus on Chinese intervention. We also have to consider that there has been intervention since the day we formed Confederation here, that there has been American intervention. So there's an interesting concept that you just brought up about the colonial concept and the Canadian identity. And it seems that we're constantly being challenged in North America, that we're trying to be, we're considered American externally to the world because of affiliation of landmass and borders. But yet we're trying to keep our feet rooted in the British tradition, in the form of government and stuff. But at the same time, how do we talk about foreign intervention from our cousins in the South?
It's an interesting challenge, Andy, because I've spoken to a lot of different groups, and primarily they want to ask about, obviously, China and Chinese intervention, and the public inquiry and all these other issues around that. But I have to remind them that and this isn't excusing Chinese intervention, by the way, but you have to remind them that Canada has a long history of British intervention. Canada then has a long history of American intervention or influence, and that has, that's political, maybe not into a formal political system, but that is political intervention or influence, right down to culture, the TV that most people, all those other things. So we have a long history of being shaped by others. And we can also add to that, obviously, I'm talking with a British accent, European migration into Canada, bringing different diaspora into forms of influence into what Canadians think are important issues. So we need to think about whether intervention is, if you want to put it different ways, benign intervention, TV, or malign intervention by those who would like to see Canada be divided. And I think that's how you can differentiate the two. If it's Russian, if it's Chinese, maybe some other countries as well, we might consider those malign acts against Canada, whereas others are, hopefully people don't think I'm changing Canadian identity by living and working and being Canadian now.
So for the benefit of the viewer, hearing these terms, foreign intervention, foreign interference, are we in a way asking for trouble? Like, are we making it fair ground for them to come say, well, you've intervened in my business, so now I'm going to intervene in yours?
I'd say not so much. Two things I'll say about that one. One is, at least in terms of peacekeeping, peacekeeping goes somewhere when the UN Security Council has authorized it, and it generally has involved host state consent. So whatever the government is in whatever country it's taking place, they have agreed to accept UN peacekeepers, because the old mantra at least was impartial, neutral, and no use of force, or force only in self-defense. So that would not normally be described as, if you want to, intervention against the wishes of a host government. And as is happening now with the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, when the host government says, we don't want you anymore, they tell the UN, leave, and the UN withdraws. So that kind of, if you want, intervention isn't intervention that is forced on a country. It is intervention often at the request of that country.
All right. So coming back to interference and intervention, because I know we're coming near the end of this. So when we hear about this in the media, when there's this big uproar, hands and arms in the air, that the Chinese have interfered or intervened, are we talking about something serious like an act of war? Are we talking about something that is so heinous that we should be upset about this thing? Or is there something there that we don't realize because it's realpolitik, like you said before? It happens for hundreds of years, and now it's even more exacerbated by social media. So the question is this something that we have ignored for so long that now it's coming here and say, well, congratulations, this is what we got to deal with?
Yeah, a little bit along those lines. I mean, obviously, as you said, Andy, social media has made it much more easy or much more possible to try to exert influence over other countries and their systems. In the old days, if you want, Voice of America or BBC broadcasting to what was then Soviet satellite states about what it is to be free and democratic. I mean, that was propaganda, that was intervention. And coming back the other way, you would get, critiques of capitalism and promote the workers' rights against the evil capitalists and all this kind of stuff. But in a sense, those were pretty immature, pretty obvious ways of intervening or trying to interfere in each other's political systems. Now, the kind of things that we're seeing and hearing about attached to China, attached to Russia and election interference in the United States, they're obviously not military or kinetic hostile acts, but they are certainly attempts to shape or reshape Canadian government, Canadian politics, Canadian policy, and Canadian society to create divisions that make a coherent, cohesive, if you want, bipartisan Canadian policy much harder to achieve. So I think those are things we certainly need to look at, not just China, there's other countries doing it to us as well.
How does we as Canadians and the Canadian government defend ourselves from this? What can we do, rank and file or anyone in society, to help us limit the amount of interference or involvement from foreign governments?
In a sense, root and branch. Finland has done this really well from young school kids onwards, trying to make them media savvy. If you see news, figure out where is it coming from. Is it a credible source? Is it disinformation or is it misinformation? So rather than falling for clickbait and getting trapped in an echo chamber and sharing something that has come from potentially a malign source, check it first before you share. We can literally do that from school age upwards, and then at the same time, as adults, if you want, take more responsibility for not just hiding in an echo chamber, but actually listening to others' views and taking them seriously, and making sure that we check our own sources. I think that's basic social media literacy, because that is what is swamping us all now.
All right, we're going to go to break, and we'll be back with addressing the issues in just a moment.
Heartbeat of Mother Earth, I feel you and embrace your warmth. I see you dancing through the trees. Your song floats on the summer breeze. Community, we come together. We are the voice of our ancestors. Thankful for how much you bless us. Feel the thunder in the drum. All our voices sing as one. Feel the power, feel the pride. Feel the drumbeat deep inside. Feel the boom, feel the bass. Let's let go of time and space. It'll make you dance, it'll make you sing. Ode Wegun, Wedok Wishin. The drum will lead you, take you far. Always remember who you are.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges? When you need support but don't know where to turn, just dial 211. 211 connects you to the programs or services near you.
211, how can I help you?
211, help starts here.
October 5th, 2014, my daughter was hit by a train. She was walking along the sides of the tracks, and it shattered her world.
For frank discussion on Canadian politics and issues that matter to you, tune in to Addressing the Issue with Andy Streisfeld, Fridays at 6:30 on Rogers TV. Welcome back to Addressing the Issue with me, Andy Streisfeld, Dr. Alistair Edgar on remote from us with here. And so there was an article that you published in the Canadian Foreign Policy Journal. And I was drawn to it because I really enjoyed the painting that you painted there of the whole relationship of defense relationships and leadership, both prime ministers and presidents. And it made sense to a lot of the questions that I had. So we're going to share this with the crowd as well. So it's entitled Growth Pains and Growing Strains, and the Limits of Your Neighborliness and Politicization of Canada, U.S. Defense Industry. So please talk to the audience about it, and then let's take it one step further and say, can we take a lesson from this and see how we can address this idea of the limits of us being the friendly neighbor to the north?
Sure. I mean, partly it was looking at the over time, the increased integration of the Canadian defense industries into not the US, but a North American defense industrial base. Now, a lot of this taking place, during the Cold War. So there was a strategic security imperative from the US side, from the Department of Defense side, wanting to, this is also the era of potential nuclear war, wanting to disperse production facilities around a wider range, and also get what they would call secure second source suppliers in the event that there were, as we're seeing now with trying to resupply Ukraine, if there were blockages in the supply system of essential materials. So the Canadian industry, of course, is much smaller. The Canadian defense market, if you want to call it that, is much smaller. So most people will have heard of the Avro Arrow and our at one time leading edge technology, which was more or less sunk in Lake Ontario to have us be more integrated into the American defense industrial base capacity. So from there, from having an autonomous defense capacity, if you will, and having a big Navy and being a big supplier at the end of the Second World War, to being essentially a second tier parts supplier into the North American defense industrial base. And some of the challenges that come with that. We don't have a big defense budget. We don't have a big military, and we can't. We can't afford it. And in many ways, we don't need it, and the Canadian public doesn't want it or doesn't want to pay for it either with taxes. But if that's the case, then we need to rely on others to build a lot of material and a lot of defense systems, combat systems. And we then want to maintain high-tech jobs, high-tech industry and capabilities in Canada. So we're not just, providing wood to lumber mills but in a defense sense. So you have a tension, Canada wanting to have some independent capacity to be able to have also an independent defense policy, while at the same time needing to rely increasingly, in particular, on the United States for providing the defense equipment that we're going to use. So you have two different countries with, as we mentioned before, a global policeman and a global good guy, peacekeeper, with different sets of interests. So, if America says fight in Vietnam, we can say no. If America says join us and fight in Iraq, we can say no, we don't want to. So you can have that capacity to be independent, but still have to work with a country because you need their resources.
So you brought the example of the Avro Arrow, and in the late 90s there was the Lavi fighter bomber out of Israel that both were quashed by the Americans. Their compensation was, we'll give you a wide variety of F-type fighters, F-4s, F-15s, but everyone to this day believes in the myth that the Avro Arrow, being the state-of-the-art technology that it was, would have set us up as world leaders in aviation, military aviation. And the fact is, would you say then that this was a very overt form of foreign intervention or foreign interference, where they literally crippled our dreams and our visions and forced us to do something that really should never have happened?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent it's counterfactual or it is counterfactual. We don't know whether the Arrow would have been a dominant system. We couldn't have produced it. We probably couldn't have sold it to European countries because they, just like us, want to build and maintain their own industries. And the Americans probably wouldn't have wanted to buy it because they don't want to be dependent on Canadian technology. So we had a great system. Whether we could have translated that into a North American dominant or a NATO dominant aerospace capacity is a different issue. And probably not. This was the period, the era of what a lot of analysts called structural disarmament. Weapons technologies and the cost of producing them, researching, developing, producing them, is rising much faster than, if you want, normal civilian costs. So defense costs are rising faster than defense budgets. And in the United States at one point, they said, by 2050, the entire U.S. Air Force budget will be chewed up by producing one plane. It'll be a really good plane, but it'll only be one. Smaller countries like Canada were far ahead on that structural disarmament curve. So I don't think in the long run, the loss of the Arrow meant that we coulda, woulda, shoulda been a dominant military producer, and that we weren't because of that. But it would have been interesting to see the development of our technological capabilities on that basis.
So in the modern idea of governance, of state building, of the question now is, would foreign intervention and foreign interference end when we adopt the regionalization? So in the case of, if let's say North America became a unified government, almost like the European Union in a sense, would we be able to defend ourselves much better from interference because when you mess with one, you mess with all type of concept? Or is this just a phenomenon that it happens and it will happen until the end of time?
The latter. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I worked in the late 1980s and early 90s at NATO headquarters, having long conversations with a member of the NATO international staff. And about 2 years later, I opened the New York Times and found out that person had been East Germany's most successful spy at NATO headquarters.
Sorry.
Yeah, I felt the same way, standing in Boston and looking at this going and thinking, what conversations did I have with this guy about what I was doing at NATO headquarters? There are always going to be covert interventions, but now we are increasingly open to fairly easy mass intervention in public opinion, just through news feeds, through shaping news, through bot farms, troll farms, all the other things that other actors, whether they're state-based or non-state-based or corporate, can do to try to shape security consumers or goods consumers, people's opinions. So I think there's always been intervention. The skill set needed now for the general public to be aware of that is increasing, because I think our social media consumption has gotten ahead of our social media literacy.
All right. Dr. Alistair Edgar, Associate Professor of Political Science at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thank you for being our guest on our show today. I hope I can bring you back and we can discuss other issues regarding the United Nations or global peacemaking. I really would like to talk more about how we play a bigger role and how we diffuse conflict. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. Please tune in 6:30 on Friday evenings to catch a new episode of Addressing the Issue. Until then, stay safe.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
Are you ready for a mouth-watering culinary adventure? Join me on a taste of Grand River. From farm to table, we will explore the diverse food landscape in our community and meet passionate people behind our thriving businesses. So what are you waiting for? Come and join me every Wednesday on Rogers TV, 7 p.m. A taste of Grand River.
It's closing time, and you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive, and the buses have stopped running. You could always call your girlfriend